accessibility expert. And she has a talk that she's actually been accepted to give at JSConf EU all the way out in Berlin. And so we're super lucky to be able to see that talk here today at Cascadia. So give her a hand.
Good morning. Hear me okay? So this is my home turf. I'm from Seattle, but I was born in Eugene, Oregon, and so in between, I mean, I've stopped in Portland plenty of times. I think it's absolutely beautiful here, and I do a lot of mountain biking. I'm going to play you a little video to kick things off to help put in perspective how valuable I find the fact that I can go mountain biking. I can see my way through the trees. So we're going to watch a little video to get started. And hopefully it will load.
My name is Michael Stone. I'm a triathlete. I'm an author. And I own a bike shop. I'm often asked how, and equally as important, why I do what I do. Simply put, I love doing what I do. I happen to be legally blind with a degenerative condition that can lead to total blindness. Come take a ride with me, see the world through my eyes.
So it's going to start initializing a transition of what he sees, his degenerative vision loss. And so now he's riding through the trees and it looks all blurry, and that is terrifying. But he grew up mountain biking, I bet, and so he doesn't want to stop. It's something that he likes doing, but he's losing his vision. All right. So that's pretty scary, but it's so beautiful out there. It smells good. I mean, it's like something that you wouldn't want to stop doing just because you were losing your vision, but at some point he's going to have to stop. In real life, as developers and designers, we build projects that are of all different kinds. Banking apps, if you work at Simple, I have some friends that work there. Project tracking, if you work on Trello or Pivotal Tracker. Travel, payments, education, fitness tracking. Drinking, if you work on Untapped, or a project I'm going to talk today about Distiller, or talk about called Distiller. These are all projects that sometimes when we're down in the day-to-day grind, we think that maybe we don't need to support people with disabilities. But if you look at this list of general topics, who wouldn't need to use any of these things? They're everyday needs that we have, that we are supporting people with technology to create apps that make our lives better and easier and more convenient. So really, those should extend to everybody. So fortunately, we have some guidelines that we can use and some techniques in our JavaScript applications. It's called ARIA, and Alex talked a little bit about it yesterday. It's called Accessible Rich Internet Applications, and fortunately she gave us a really good rundown yesterday on some general principles that go into ARIA. I'm going to go in today to talk specifically about single-page apps, which there are a lot of on the internet now, and we need to know what the challenges are and how can we make those better. Fortunately, ARIA was made for this, so I'm going to talk about that today. I'm Marcy Sutton. As Ellen said, I live in Seattle and I work at Substantial. And so I want to ask the question, what is the best framework? Come on, you have to have a favorite. Is it Angular? Is it Ember? React? Famous, maybe? Maybe you're excited about that. Oh no, what happened to my server? Ruining a joke. Hold on. Wouldn't be a presentation without a little technical difficulty. Calm down. I'm not going to make you pick a favorite, because they all do certain things well, and we just need to know what are the common problems that we might have, because we might change what framework we're using on the next project. I've used Angular. I've played with Ember. I really want to play with React. I'm not going to discriminate and say that one is better than the other. The canonical example for a single-page app is To-Do MVC, a little to-do application so you can keep track of things you need to do. They aren't that accessible, surprisingly. These are really simple applications, but they're good ways for you to get up and running with a framework. I think that there are little things that they could do to make that better, but I'm not going to spend much time picking those apart today. I just wanted to say that there are many, obviously, if you look at the array of choices on To-Do MVC. But the pieces in a single-page application, we should break down a little bit. The model, the data portion of your application. The view, which I'm going to argue is probably the most important part for you to consider when you're thinking about accessibility in a single-page application. The controller. And depending on which framework you're using, it might not be called a controller. It might be a router or some other magical thing. Maybe it's just referred to as the star in the MV star in your single-page application. Whatever, I don't care what it is, MV star, it doesn't really matter. It's just the end user experience is this asynchronous, smooth experience where your page doesn't refresh from in between view to view. So however you accomplish that end user experience is the common thing that we're referring to here with a single page application. So I mentioned that the view is probably the most important part of a single page application's accessibility. Whether those views are accessible depends on a few things. It depends on the framework. So if you're using Angular or Ember, you're pretty well supported. There are some things you have to do, which we'll talk about. React, I haven't gotten to play with much yet. I'm really curious because they have a different approach to rendering with their DOM diff, and I just need to learn more about it, so I'm excited to check out what they've got going on. And then there's Famous, which they have admitted is not accessible at all. So I would caution you, if you're using that, that until they solve that accessibility problem, it's kind of irresponsible for us to use something that is, clearly labeled as inaccessible. But if you're playing with it in your free time, that's cool. Like, it's cool to be excited about a framework. We just need to know when it isn't going to support our users' needs. The screen reader that your users are depending on can also change whether your views are accessible. Your browser, there are browser differences in how code gets rendered, how all kinds of things happen, routing, and your shitty code. Or is it shitty? I don't know. We have all different kinds of techniques that we can use to build things. There's an infinite number of ways that you could accomplish building something. So how you build it can determine whether your views are accessible. And that's what we're going to talk about today. How do you know whether your code is accessible or not? Alex talked a little bit yesterday about the 4 principles in WCAG, which is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. In 2008, they published a version that included these principles, POUR, perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. And that's a good measuring stick of whether your code is accessible or not. Really, it should just mean that your code is awesome. Like, it blows people away no matter what their abilities are. Instead of to support accessibility saying, well, we're going to have a separate accessibility site that's text only and it's not interactive and it's boring. Like, come on, that's not fair. If you're going to make it interactive and cool and use the newest technology, you just need to know what do you need to do for accessibility, and how can you combine that awesome, innovative experience with something that's accessible. And that is what has me super excited to talk to you about accessibility. It should blow people away. So specifically, some of the challenges in single-page applications. Interactivity. And it seems pretty obvious, but when we can create our own UIs and we can bind things with JavaScript and the framework is saying do it this way, like ng-click or whatever way that the framework way of doing something, sometimes maybe their docs don't tell you that you also need to bind key press events, or maybe you just don't think about using the keyboard, so you don't add a focus state in your CSS. These are pretty easy wins, and when you make it more interactive, people who have low vision, like our friend Michael, who was mountain biking in the beginning, as his vision would deteriorate, he would probably need more visual impact so that he could see where he was on the screen. Update notification. And I'll talk about these topics a little bit more in depth. But basically, if you have something happening somewhere in your app, like say you're using a Backbone app and you're filtering, you want to know what's happening elsewhere on the screen so that you're kept up to date of what is happening in the single page application. Whereas if you can see it, you can see that maybe I'm on this input text field and I see stuff happening elsewhere in the app, but I don't have any idea what's happening, what's filtering, what's changing if I can't see it. And lastly, focus management. This is a way of handling some of those updates in the app to know for a non-sighted user what's happening. And sometimes the update notification and the method for that I'll talk about, sometimes that isn't the right approach, and you actually need to guide the user through the app using their keyboard focus. And worth mentioning quickly, but I could spend a whole talk on this, is graceful degradation. If your whole app depends on JavaScript, which is okay, and I'll tell you why, if your whole experience depends on certain things working, like certain modern technologies, that's okay, but you need to warn people and say, hey, just letting you know you're using an old version of this browser or whatever the thing is. So that way people know why it's broken. And that's kind of our bare minimum responsibility if we're really charging forward with new technology. Interactivity. I have a funny example here on the screen. It says, touch the rainbow. I think Skittles just has hilarious campaigns. There's an arrow pointing at a Skittle, and I'm going to hold my finger, aka the mouse cursor, over this, and we can get an idea of something that is interactive. So it's counting down. What are we going to get? There's a guy licking the Skittle on the other end. And it causes this really strange reaction to this animated GIF on the screen. Like, your reaction to that, it's funny, but it's creating a connection between you, the viewer, and this thing on the screen. So that's kind of a far-out example of simulating that connection that you have with your computer for interactivity. A more concrete example is a hamburger button, and we've all been calling it the hamburger button, but it's typically the 3 lines that came about on mobile websites. It's now creeped onto desktop as well. I have literally a hamburger icon on the screen, and for this to be accessible, I should be able to touch it, I should be able to tab onto it with my keyboard, but if I start tabbing, I can't get to it. I see a skip to navigation link, and then I see my code area, which is content editable. But I skip right by this hamburger button. So it's not understandable, and it's not operable, first of all. It's not operable because I can't operate it from the keyboard. If I click on it, I get some feedback. It opens a menu that says lettuce, tomato, E. coli. Those are some hamburger-related nav items. And so the code below here shows you what this hamburger button is made of, besides E. coli and lettuce and tomato. It's a div, and it just says hamburger button, and that's it. It's just a div. It has some CSS applying the hamburger thing, and it gives it dimensions and whatnot. But it doesn't tell me that it's a button. It doesn't tell me that it controls a group of nav items that are hamburger related. So it's not operable, and it's not understandable, because I don't know what this div does. I don't even know that it's interactive, really, even if I'm on a keyboard, let alone a screen reader. That's one step further in that it's not understandable because they don't know it operates a menu. Actually, this fails all 4 principles: perceivability, operability, understandability, and robustness. For this to be understandable and meet all those principles, there's a couple of different ways that you can do this. So now if I tab, I go right to the button. I can hit enter, and it will open and close these items. And this is pretty easy to do. If you use a button, it's automatically interactive. If you used a link, it would be interactive, but arguably that might not be the right element. If I really, for some reason, had to use a div, there's a couple things I could add. I could add a role of button so that it communicates to assistive technology that it is a button. If I add tab index of 0, then it puts it in the tab order in the page, and it reflects the order in your actual HTML markup. If I add tab index values higher than 0, then I create a new tab order. And that's hard to manage, so I'd be careful of that. And lastly, I have an ARIA label on the div and on the button that says menu. And if you notice, both of these elements are empty. They don't have text in them. That magical attribute, the ARIA label, does essentially add context to these elements to say, though these are menu buttons. And so now it passes the principles. An Angular example of something that's not operable. I have a div, and it has an ng-click on it, and it has tab index. So I can tab onto it, but I can't hit enter, because it just has ng-click. An ng-click, similar to a click event in JavaScript, does not click on a key press. It doesn't fire it. I can click this, and I will get a joust image. Tall bike jousting is pretty awesome if you've never seen it. So the operable example of this, if I add a row of button and the tab index, the role will tell assistive technology that this is a button. And if I add an ng-click and then the whatever callback function I need, if I also add ng-keypress along with that, and the reason for that is because this is a div and not a button. If it was a button, it would register the event, it would be fine. But now it's a div, I can tab onto it with the tab index, I can hit enter, it will fire it. So it's important to know what you get for free with HTML, which events are supposed to fire. If you're using a div, chances are it doesn't give you anything, so you have to build it up a little bit. It would be better if you just used a button, maybe. That would be probably better. But when you're using a framework, they might not tell you that you need ng-keypress along with ng-click in Angular. So it's important to go and test it from the keyboard, and you'll find out, wow, this doesn't work. How do I make it work? And then you'll go, oh, okay. That's not unexpected if you know which events come with keypress and which elements. So the last thing in interactivity is talking about visual feedback. And I have this cat seeing his reflection in the mirror and getting all spazzed out. And I love these examples that kind of, really make you think about what does interactivity and visual feedback mean. So really quickly, I have some Sass up here on the screen, an anchor, and it has a color. And this is such an easy win that even though this is a JavaScript conference, I thought it was worth saying that if you add a focus pseudo element along with your hover and then just change the style in some way, it will do wonders for keyboard accessibility. Super easy. So JavaScript can be required, and we're at a JavaScript conference, so that's good news, right? And I said earlier that graceful degradation was important. Just a warning message would be fine. At least that's my opinion. I don't know if everyone agrees with that. There's some people who think that everything has to work without JavaScript. I think that's crazy. You can't use the modern web without JavaScript. The reason why I think it's okay and why I want to tell you a little more about it, this thing keeps moving. If you saw my talk about accessibility of web components, you might have heard me talk about the rendering tree. And a screen reader encounters a page after it's done rendering, after it's been affected by JavaScript and CSS. So if you inject views into the page with JavaScript, screen reader will encounter that after it's completed, and it will get one tree. And that's why it's okay to use JavaScript in a screen reader. Similarly, if you use display none in your CSS, it will keep the object out of the accessibility tree. So if you have something that you don't want to be read aloud to a screen reader, you can either put ARIA hidden on it, but then it will be visually rendered. If you put display none, then nobody will see it. So you want to curate this visibility experience. When should things be visible to everybody? When should they be hidden from a screen reader because they don't mean anything? These are things that we should think about. I have an Ember example here of a custom element, and I thought this was pretty cool. Ember has created a library that allows you to create custom elements. And you can say, when it's done doing its thing, you can say what tag you want it to be. And I have a gold hot pants component, which I'll tell you a little bit more about in a second. And in my gold hot pants component, when I initialize it, I can use attribute bindings to apply tab index. If it's a div and I want it to be tabbable, I can affect different properties in this component using Ember's bound attributes. You could also apply ARIA this way. I have a tag name in here of section. So I could say the gold hot pants thing is kind of like a section. Even though Ember would probably make a div, I can specify what tag name. And that's important because the type of tag makes a difference in a screen reader. It will read aloud button element, section element, generic element. I don't know what it reads for a div, but it doesn't mean anything. So if you want it to mean something, then you want to use an appropriate tag name. This is Tom Dale. He helped create Ember.js, and he really likes wearing gold shorts. So when I went to create an Ember example, I went, oh, well, it has to deal with gold shorts, right? Of course. So I was like, how can I make an accessible Ember demo? I could have a picture of Tom's shorts. These are not literally his shorts. I found them on the internet. But I could maybe make a little thing that allows you to add captions, and then you can pick one to be the winning caption and have it update the alt attribute of the image. So I have this thing. I'm going to zoom into the DevTools so we can see the alt attribute update in the code, because you might not believe me otherwise. So in here, and I'm not a huge fan of how Ember puts all these script tags around every thing that it updates, but I've heard that that will hopefully be changing. But as far as accessibility goes, it's not a huge deal. So I have an input, it's labeled, although getting a label using ARIA was a little challenging, so I just put a label off screen. So caption Tom Dale's gold hot pants. If I don't know, my caption I kept adding was beer. It already says shiny, ow my eye. Does anybody have a caption that they want to add? Shout one out. Give me a caption. What was that? Oh, I don't know. That's not really family friendly. Golden eye. How about that? I don't know if that's any better. So I have a radio button. I can change this, and I'm just outputting what the alt attribute is changing to on the screen so you could see it. But it's also updating it in the image. So if we look over here, where's our image? Yeah, image alt says GoldenEye. So by using bound attributes and some Ember magic inside of this component, I could update the alt attribute and make something kind of funny. A little bit more about ARIA. The roles that I mentioned, this is a good way to think about these different pieces in ARIA. For roles, what does this thing do? Is it a nav thing? Is it a banner? Is it a landmark? Is it a button or an anchor? There are different roles that you can tell assistive technology, what is the role of this thing? The state is what is the current condition of this particular thing? And the example is an input tag, and it says ARIA disabled true. So if you had some HTML element that had a state that could be disabled or enabled, you can tell assistive technology that state by using ARIA disabled, and then whatever the value is. And then a property is an ARIA, example would be ARIA required. It's always going to be required. It's never going to change. It would either be true or false. So a property is something that doesn't change. A state is something that you can update on and off. As for the roles, there are so many. There's this huge list I have in here. We're not going to read these. This is more a resource. But there are a ton of roles. So if you go and read about these, you can choose the right one for you. And some of them are abstract roles. You wouldn't use them directly. So using these roles. They're element types, like I said. There's buttons, there's links, there's images, there's all kinds of different stuff. There's also landmarks. Some of the important ones are nav, banner, header, main. There's only supposed to be one main in a document. And these are ways that a screen reader can actually jump around the page. You want to start with native HTML tags before you start adding roles. And you shouldn't override things. Like if I have a paragraph, it's going to have a role of paragraph, and I shouldn't override that. If I want to create specific roles, I need to know what I'm overriding and be careful. So if I use a div, it's generic, so it could probably take any role. For help on this, if you read the documentation, that will help, and I have a link in here in my slides so you can go and read more about this. And lastly, don't overdo it. There is such a thing as too much ARIA in your code, especially if it's not being used correctly. It can end up making your code even worse than it would be if it didn't have any ARIA at all. It's important to talk about application mode in a screen reader. And there are different modes in a screen reader that you should know about. And the first one is the virtual cursor. And so this is the normal default mode in a screen reader. What it means is that in virtual cursor mode, when you're navigating through the web in a screen reader, it doesn't pass every one of your commands back to the browser. If you tap the H key, you're going to go through the headings in the page in the screen reader, and it's not actually going to send that H key command back to the browser. When you encounter certain functions like a form, it will actually change the mode of the screen reader so that your input goes back to the browser and is inputted in the form. You can trigger this mode by using the role of application. And here I have a dance detector because my coworker actually created a dance detector, and it will spin a disco ball, or they're trying to make it. It'll spin a disco ball when you dance. So with this role of application, I can tell the screen reader, no, I got it. You can send the input right to me. If you put this role on the body, then you're doing that for everything, and it is a huge headache. So don't do that. Update notification. In Windows or any OS, when you had an alert, it would draw your focus there, it would announce it, and so there's support for screen readers. In a web app, we have things that are more asynchronous, and they're supposed to be a little more on the side and less annoying. So these web app alerts we can handle with ARIA live regions, and they're notifications of updates without the user losing focus. A quick example here of a live region, if I have an element on the page and it has ARIA live of assertive, anytime I append code to that, it will get read in the screen reader. And I'll show you an example here quickly. Distiller, I'll mention, is an app that I've been working on for whiskey lovers at Substantial. They're also hiring if you're actually interested in working on that. I'm going to fire up VoiceOver.
VoiceOver on Chrome. Expert Whiskey Recommendations vertical line distiller window. Expert Whiskey Recommendations vertical line distiller HTML content has keyboard focus.
I'm going to sign in, and hopefully my ARIA Live region support will still be there.
Sign in. Member access. Enter your email, enter your password, username or email.
Oh no, it's going to make me sign in.
Twitter authorize an application page has Expert Whiskey Recommendations vertical line distiller sign in. Member access.
That's a
Twitter
bummer.
authorize an application page has.
I thought I had it bookmarked.
Expert Whiskey Recommendation. Sign in. Expert
Well, I think my demo is hosed.
Username or email required.
Which is
HTML
fine,
content.
because we're kind of low on time. So what I'll explain here quickly is that when you sign in and out, you actually get feedback that says you have signed in. And then when you log out, it says you have signed out. And it will tell you that like immediately because I'm using the ARIA role or ARIA Live of assertive. It used to be called rude, which I thought was kind of funny. But instead, it says assertive. And what that means is it'll read it immediately. So lastly, I want to talk to you about focus management. And this is the most important thing in a single-page application. When you're creating an experience that's a single-page app, you have to guide the user around. And I talked a little bit earlier about views and how views get appended. In Distiller, when I started on it, there's a part of the app that you could reorder a list of whiskey bottles, and it wasn't accessible. I made it accessible by making it work from the keyboard, by adding interactivity and making it so that you could actually rearrange the items using JavaScript events. But every time you reordered it, my focus would be on the list item. And when it would try to move it, to re-render the list, it would rip the entire thing out and then put it back. Because in Spine.js, which we were using, and Handlebars, that combination of rendering, it would actually rip the list out and put it back. So if my focus is on the item, then I'm lost. And I get what's called freak-out mode. Freak out! So we have to counter that by sending their focus back into the code. So I have an example here of a focus manager that we wrote for Distiller. And when you focus anywhere on the body, it checks if you had stored a focus from a previous thing. Like if I was navigating before I lost focus, I stored, the last time I ran through this, I stored a reference to a data ID or whatever method you're using to say, hey, I want you to send focus back to me when this is done. And so then when it renders again, because it's a single-page application, I know that I need to send focus back to something. And so I can check these data IDs and send focus back and forth. This made it so that this sorting feature on Distiller, which I'm really sorry about my demo. If you want to see that, come and talk to me and I'll show it to you. But perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. Because it was interactive, we could use the keyboard. I think it's robust because it's modern technology. We're not siloing accessibility users with the boring, separate site, which I think is pretty awesome. And you know what? You guys totally got this. You can make your stuff interactive. You can add update notification with ARIA live regions. You could use focus management. Using a little JavaScript, we learned about the ng click and the ng key press. So knowing when the keyboard, like what do you have to do to add extra support for the keyboard? And then focus management. Sending their focus around, you're curating this experience. And sometimes you have to close your eyes a little bit to think about, okay, well, where's the user going to be? What's going to be read aloud in the screen reader? What do I have to do to support non-visual users or even low vision users? If this guy, Spencer, without any legs, can climb Mount Kilimanjaro, I think we can accomplish making our single-page apps more accessible. So thanks, everybody.